A billionaire purchases a simple necklace from a beggar, but when he hears the story behind it, his entire life is turned upside down. Don't miss this tale of fate, transformation, and the power of kindness. The city streets buzzed with life. But amid the crowd, a lone beggar sat on the corner of Fifth Avenue. This woman, dressed in tattered clothes, her hair streaked with gray, clutched a small weathered box. Her weary eyes told stories of struggles, but her posture revealed an unusual dignity, as though she carried something of value despite her circumstances. For years, she had been a fixture on that corner, mostly ignored by passers-by who were too busy with their lives to notice her. Meanwhile, towering above the streets was one of the city's wealthiest, Mina, self-made billionaire, whose name carried weight in the business world. Known for his sharp suits, sleek cars, and relentless pursuit of success, the man's exterior reflected a life of luxury. But inside, he was haunted by a void he couldn't fill. Despite his success, he had grown disillusioned with the monotony of wealth and privilege. The only thing that kept him moving was his insatiable hunger for more deals, more investments, more recognition. On this particular day, his path intersected with the beggar's as he left his office, annoyed by a business deal that hadn't gone as planned. He was about to walk past her when something caught his eye. The billionaire's gaze fell on the small box in the beggar's hands. It was plain, with scuff marks that hinted at years of wear. Yet something about the way she held it piqued his curiosity. She noticed his stare and, for the first time in years, someone spoke to her. "Is that for sale?" he asked, his tone sharp but curious. The beggar looked up, startled by the question. Clutching the box tighter, she hesitated. "It depends," she finally replied, her voice carrying the weight of countless hardships. The billionaire, unimpressed by the cryptic answer, reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. "I'll pay for it," he said, expecting the transaction to end quickly. But instead of taking the money, the beggar opened the box. Inside was a simple, handmade necklace, delicate and unassuming, yet radiating a unique charm. She explained, "This is not just any necklace. It's a story, and the story matters more than the money." Intrigued despite himself, the billionaire decided to listen. The moment marked the beginning of a journey neither of them could have anticipated, a journey that would unravel secrets, challenge beliefs, and change both their lives forever. Alexander walked away from the woman, the necklace resting heavily in his pocket. He couldn't explain why he had bought it, or why her cryptic words lingered in his mind. As he stepped into his sleek black car, the rain continued to pour, creating an almost meditative rhythm against the windshield. He inspected the necklace under the soft interior lighting. It was a beautiful piece, though clearly aged. The intricate design featured a delicate gold chain and a locket adorned with a small sapphire at its center. Something about it felt oddly familiar, stirring a faint memory from his childhood, though he couldn't quite grasp it. That evening, Alexander returned to his penthouse, a sprawling marvel of modern architecture with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city skyline. Despite its grandeur, the space felt hollow. Shelves filled with unread books and walls adorned with abstract art couldn't mask the emptiness of his life. He placed the necklace on a glass table in his study, intending to forget about it. Yet, as the hours passed, his mind kept wandering back to the woman and her parting words. Unable to sleep, Alexander found himself staring at the necklace again, a faint unease settling over him. The following day, Alexander's routine resumed as usual. His assistant, a sharp and efficient woman in her 30s, briefed him on the day's agenda. Meetings, stock reports, and a charity gala filled his schedule. But even amidst the chaos of his high-powered life, the necklace remained at the back of his mind. As he sipped his morning coffee, he absent-mindedly searched for a jeweler who could appraise the piece. Something about its craftsmanship suggested it held more value than its worn appearance let on. Later that afternoon, Alexander visited an upscale jeweler in the city. The jeweler, a middle-aged man with a discerning eye and a refined demeanor, examined the necklace with great care. After a long pause, he glanced at Alexander with an expression of astonishment. "This is no ordinary necklace," he said, his voice tinged with reverence. "It dates back to the early 1900s and was part of a limited collection created for European royalty." Alexander's brow furrowed as the jeweler continued. "Whoever owned this piece likely had a story worth telling. The revelation sent a shiver through Alexander. What was this beggar doing with such a rare treasure? And why did it feel like this discovery was only the beginning of something far greater? The mystery of the necklace consumed Alexander's thoughts. He found himself poring over old photographs, combing through history books, and delving into the archives of rare jewelry collections to uncover its origins. The jeweler's words had struck a chord. Had such a remarkable piece ended up in the hands of someone living on the streets? Determined to uncover the truth, Alexander sought out private investigators to learn more about the beggar. They quickly identified her as Eleanor, a once prominent pianist who had vanished from the public eye over a decade ago. According to their findings, her career had been cut short by a devastating personal tragedy. A fire that had destroyed her family home, claimed the lives of her husband and young daughter, and left her with nothing. In the aftermath, Eleanor had fallen into obscurity, her once glittering life reduced to the margins of society. But something about the investigators' report didn't add up. Alexander felt there was more to her story, something deeper, something untold. The necklace, with its royal connections and undeniable beauty, seemed to hold a key to her past. It was then he decided to track her down, to hear the truth from Eleanor herself. On a dreary afternoon, he returned to the street corner where he'd first encountered her. The rain had stopped, but the air remained heavy with moisture. She was there, just as he had remembered, her frail figure hunched against the cold, her eyes carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken sorrows. He approached her, this time not as a passing billionaire, but as a man driven by curiosity and, perhaps, guilt. "Excuse me," he began hesitantly, pulling the necklace from his coat pocket. Her eyes widened in recognition, and for the first time Alexander saw a flicker of emotion beyond wearinessa, blend of fear, longing, and pain. "Can we talk about this?" Eleanor hesitated but eventually nodded. They moved to a nearby cafe, its warm, dimly lit interior a stark contrast to the bleakness outside. Over steaming cups of tea, she began to tell her story, her voice trembling as she recounted the events that had led her to this point. Alexander listened intently, his heart heavy as the pieces of her shattered life began to form a poignant, haunting picture. As Eleanor spoke, Alexander was struck by the elegance in her mannerisms, a quiet dignity that time and misfortune had failed to erase. Her story unfolded like a tragic symphony. The necklace, she explained, had been a gift from her husband, a family heirloom passed down through generations. It was a symbol of their love, a token of hope during the happiest days of her life. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she described the fire that had taken everything from her. "I was out performing that night," she said softly, her hands trembling as she gripped her tea. "My husband stayed home with our daughter. When I returned, there was nothing left but ashes." The pain in her voice was almost too much to bear, and Alexander felt an ache in his chest as he imagined the depth of her loss. The necklace had somehow survived the fire, a small miracle amidst the devastation. It became her last connection to her family, a fragile thread tethering her to a past she could never reclaim. "I couldn't part with it," she admitted. "No matter how desperate things got, it was all I had left of them." But as time wore on, Eleanor's circumstances grew dire. Homeless and struggling to survive, she was forced to make a heartbreaking decision. "I thought it would be better in someone else's hands," she said, her voice breaking. "At least it would mean something to someone again." Alexander sat in stunned silence, the weight of her words settling over him like a heavy fog. He realized the necklace wasn't just an object of beauty or historical value, it was a vessel of memory, love, and loss. Eleanor's story had transformed it into something sacred. For the first time, Alexander felt ashamed of the life he had built. His wealth and success had brought him everything but purpose. Listening to Eleanor's story, he was struck by the stark contrast between their lives. Her resilience in the face of unimaginable tragedy, and his emptiness despite having it all. He resolved to do something not just for Eleanor, but to find meaning in his own life as well. Alexander's resolve to help Eleanor set him on a new path. He began researching ways to restore dignity to her life, feeling that merely handing her money would trivialize the depth of her story. But before he could act, Eleanor hesitated to share more. There was one part of her past she was reluctant to discuss, a fragment of her life that seemed locked behind the haunted look in her eyes. She revealed that the necklace's origins ran deeper than even she fully understood. Her husband had told her it was from an old estate sale, a rare find he'd stumbled upon while working as an art dealer. Yet, years before the fire, an anonymous letter had arrived at their home, warning them that the necklace was stolen property. Eleanor had dismissed it at the time, unwilling to believe such an absurd claim, but her husband had grown distant, as though grappling with some unseen burden. "I never understood what he was hiding," Eleanor murmured, her voice tinged with regret. "And now I'll never know." She gazed at the necklace on the table between them, its gleaming surface reflecting the cafe's warm light. "All I have are questions." Alexander was intrigued. Was it possible that the necklace's journey to Eleanor's family had been tainted by deception? If so, what implications did that hold for its true value, not just monetary, but emotional and historical? He offered to look into it, not just out of curiosity, but because he wanted to give Eleanor clarity and peace. Days turned into weeks as Alexander dove into uncovering the necklace's mysterious past. His search took him through dusty auction records, private collections, and obscure historical archives. He even enlisted the help of an expert historian, Dr. Margaret Vance, whose knowledge of aristocratic heirlooms became invaluable. Together, they pieced together fragments of the necklace's story, revealing a lineage that spanned centuries and continents. Through their findings, they discovered that the necklace had once belonged to a 19th-century duchess who had been exiled from her kingdom. It was rumored to have been stolen during political upheaval and had vanished for decades before reappearing in Eleanor's possession. The more Alexander learned, the more he realized how deeply intertwined Eleanor's life had become with this extraordinary artifact. The research culminated in an unexpected discovery. The necklace had not only been stolen, but had once been the subject of a bitter legal battle between two noble families. Its recovery had been considered impossible, lost to the annals of history until now. Armed with this knowledge, Alexander felt compelled to protect its legacy while ensuring that Eleanor's connection to it was honored. When he shared his findings with Eleanor, her reaction was one of quiet astonishment. "It's as though my family was part of a story far bigger than I ever imagined," she said, her voice soft with wonder. But beneath her awe, there was a flicker of uncertainty. What would happen now that the truth was out? Alexander assured her that his intentions were not to take the necklace from her, but to help her reclaim her life. "This necklace doesn't just belong to history, it belongs to you," he said. "It's a part of your story, and that story deserves to be known." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of gratitude. She had spent years feeling invisible, her life reduced to shadows and silence. Now someone was listening. Someone cared enough to see her, not just as a relic of misfortune, but as a person with value and a voice. Alexander took the next step in his journey to help Eleanor by organizing a private event, a gala, where he would unveil the necklace's history and share her story with the world. He believed that by doing so, he could not only restore Eleanor's dignity, but also raise awareness about the struggles faced by people like her. The preparations for the gala were unlike anything Alexander had ever undertaken. It was no longer about opulence or status. Every detail was designed to celebrate resilience and humanity. Eleanor, hesitant at first, agreed to attend. She still struggled with the idea of being in the spotlight after years of living in the shadows, but Alexander's unwavering support gave her the courage to face her fears. As the date of the gala approached, Alexander felt a transformation within himself. This wasn't just about helping Eleanor anymore, it was about finding meaning in his own life, about using his wealth and influence to make a real difference. The night of the gala arrived, and the air buzzed with anticipation. The venue, a grand hall adorned with timeless elegance, was filled with a mix of historians, philanthropists, journalists, and art collectors. Alexander stood at the center of it all, feeling a strange but welcome nervousness. This was not the kind of event he usually hosted. Tonight was about more than wealth or prestige. It was about telling a story that mattered. Eleanor arrived shortly before the event began, her presence both radiant and fragile. For the first time in years, she wore a dress that wasn't tattered or borrowed. Alexander had ensured she had everything she needed for this night, but it wasn't the dress or the makeup that transformed her, it was the glimmer of hope in her eyes. As guests mingled, examining the displays that told the story of the necklace's storied past. Eleanor remained in the background, hesitant to step forward. She watched as people admired the artifact, speaking in hushed tones about its incredible journey. For the first time, she saw the necklace not as a burden, but as a symbol of endurance, of how beauty and history could survive even the harshest trials. Alexander took to the stage, his voice steady but filled with emotion. He began by recounting the historical significance of the necklace, weaving together the threads of its journey across generations. Then, with a deliberate pause, he shifted the focus to Eleanor. "This necklace is not just a relic of the past," he said, his voice carrying through the room. "It's a testament to resilience, to the strength of those who carry the weight of history on their shoulders. Tonight, I want to introduce you to someone who embodies that strength." All eyes turned to Eleanor as Alexander gestured for her to join him on stage. She hesitated for a moment, her fear threatening to paralyze her. But then she saw the warmth in Alexander's gaze. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. The room fell silent as she approached the microphone. Her hands trembled as she spoke, but her voice was steady. "For years I thought this necklace was the only thing I had left. But tonight, I realize it's not just about what we've lost, it's about what we choose to preserve." Eleanor's words resonated deeply, casting a spell over the audience. She spoke not only about the necklace, but about her life, her love for her husband, the fire that had taken everything, and the years of hardship that followed. Her voice wavered at times, but each word carried the weight of her journey, and the audience hung on every syllable. "I was afraid to tell my story," she admitted, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. "I thought it didn't matter. But this necklace, and the kindness of a stranger, have shown me that even the smallest fragments of our lives can carry meaning." The audience erupted into applause, some moved to tears. In that moment, Eleanor felt something she hadn't in years: a sense of belonging, of being seen. Alexander stood beside her, his heart swelling with pride. He knew that this moment was not just a victory for Eleanor, but a turning point for him as well. As the applause died down, Alexander revealed the final piece of his plan. "Tonight, I am proud to announce the establishment of the Eleanor Foundation," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "This foundation will provide resources and support for those who, like Eleanor, have faced unimaginable challenges. It will ensure that their stories, their strength, and their dignity are never forgotten." The announcement was met with a standing ovation. Eleanor turned to Alexander, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "You've given me more than I ever thought possible," she whispered. "I wanted it to be a surprise," he replied with a soft smile. "This is your moment, Eleanor." The auctioneer took the stage, and the bidding began. The energy in the room shifted to one of excitement and generosity. Hands shot up as the price climbed higher and higher. Eleanor stood to the side, overwhelmed by the spectacle. This single moment, a culmination of her trials and Alexander's generosity, felt almost surreal. As the numbers soared, Eleanor found herself reflecting on what the necklace had meant to her. It had been a reminder of love and loss, a burden and a blessing. And now, it was transforming into something much greater, a force for good. Finally, the auctioneer's gavel came down with a resounding thud. The final bid, an astronomical sum, left the room buzzing with awe. The winner, a kind-looking woman in her late 40s, approached Eleanor afterward. "This piece deserves to be cherished," she said warmly, "and its story will live on." Eleanor nodded, gratitude etched into her expression. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. With the necklace's sale complete, Alexander took the stage one last time. "This isn't just about money," he said. "It's about the lives we can change, the futures we can build. And it's all thanks to one woman's courage to share her story." As the crowd began to disperse, Eleanor found herself standing by the massive windows overlooking the city. The lights stretched endlessly into the night, a stark contrast to the darkness that had once defined her life. She felt Alexander's presence beside her before he spoke. "You did it," he said simply. "No," she replied, her voice steady but emotional. "We did it." For a moment they stood in silence, watching the city pulse with life. It was a quiet acknowledgement of how far they had both come. Alexander, once consumed by guilt and detachment, had found purpose in helping Eleanor, and Eleanor, who had spent years hiding from the world, had finally stepped into the light. The evening's success had not only raised an extraordinary amount for the foundation but also inspired everyone who attended. Word of the event spread quickly, making headlines in newspapers and trending on social media. From rags to resilience, the tale of a necklace and a new beginning, read one headline. In the following days, Alexander and Eleanor worked together to set up the foundation. Eleanor, once a solitary figure, found herself surrounded by a growing team of passionate individuals. She became the face of the foundation, using her story to inspire others and raise awareness for those in need. Alexander, meanwhile, found that his involvement with the foundation brought a new sense of fulfillment to his life. No longer content with boardrooms and balance sheets, he poured his energy into philanthropy, rediscovering a sense of humanity he hadn't felt in years. The sale of the necklace not only funded the foundation but also served as a catalyst for other contributions. Donations poured in, and soon, the Eleanor Foundation became a beacon of hope for those struggling to rebuild their lives. One evening, months after the gala, Eleanor stood on the stage of a new community center funded by the foundation. As she looked out at the crowd, a mix of donors, volunteers, and those the foundation had helped, she felt a profound sense of purpose. "Sometimes," she said, her voice carrying through the room, "what feels like the end is just the beginning." In the weeks following the auction, the Eleanor Foundation quickly became a powerful force for change. Its mission was simple yet profound: to provide opportunities for people like Eleanor, individuals whose lives had been derailed by circumstance, but who had the determination to rebuild. The foundation's first major project was announced, developing a network of shelters offering not just a roof over people's heads but also access to job training, mental health counseling, and education. The initiative was named New Horizons, symbolizing the fresh starts it aimed to provide. Eleanor threw herself into her work, visiting shelters and meeting with individuals who had been helped by the foundation. Each story she heard reminded her of her own struggles. There was Clara, a young mother who had fled an abusive relationship with her son, and Marcus, a war veteran trying to find his way back into civilian life. These encounters strengthened Eleanor's resolve. "I see myself in all of them," she confessed to Alexander one afternoon, as they toured one of the first shelters to open under the foundation. "They're just looking for a chance like I was." Alexander nodded. "And you are giving it to them," he said. "That's the difference." But it wasn't just Eleanor who was transformed. Alexander, once so focused on his empire, found himself deeply invested in the foundation's mission. His business acumen proved invaluable in navigating the complexities of managing such a large-scale initiative, and his connections brought in donors and resources. The media, too, became enamored with the story of the foundation's origins. Eleanor's transformation from a woman on the streets to the leader of a thriving organization was the kind of narrative that inspired headlines and social media campaigns. Interviews and features brought even more attention to the cause, sparking waves of donations. Through it all, Eleanor remained grounded. Despite her growing prominence, she made it a point to spend time with the people the foundation served, listening to their stories and ensuring that their needs remained at the heart of its mission. As the foundation grew, so did Eleanor's confidence. The once shy woman who could barely speak in public now commanded attention with her poise and heartfelt speeches. And alongside her, Alexander found a sense of fulfillment that he hadn't known he was missing. One pivotal moment came during the opening of a new community center. In a struggling neighborhood, the event was packed, with local residents, donors, and media in attendance. Eleanor and Alexander stood together on the stage, flanked by a banner bearing the foundation's logo, a sunrise breaking through the clouds. As Eleanor stepped forward to speak, the crowd fell silent. "Not long ago," she began, her voice steady but full of emotion, "I stood on the other side of life, wondering if I would ever find a way out of the darkness. But someone gave me a chance, a single moment of kindness that changed everything. And now, we're here to offer that same chance to anyone who needs it." Her words were met with applause, but it was the visible emotion on people's faces that struck her the most. She could see herself reflected in them, just as she had seen her past in the stories of those the foundation helped. After the event, a young girl approached Eleanor with her mother. The girl, no older than 10, held a handmade card that she shyly offered. "Thank you for helping my mommy," she said quietly. Eleanor knelt down to accept the card, her eyes welling with tears. "You are very welcome," she said, her voice catching. Moments like these reminded her why she had fought so hard to turn her life around. They also deepened her gratitude for Alexander's unwavering support. He had not only believed in her, but had given her the tools and platform to make a difference. Alexander, for his part, found that working with Eleanor brought out a side of him he hadn't known existed. The icy demeanor he had once cultivated had melted away, replaced by genuine warmth and empathy. He no longer measured success by the size of his bank account, but by the lives he could help transform. The two of them made a formidable team, their strengths complementing each other perfectly. While Alexander handled logistics and strategy, Eleanor focused on the human element, ensuring that the foundation remained true to its mission. Together, they were changing lives, and in doing so, they had found purpose and healing for themselves as well. As the months passed, the Eleanor Foundation continued to expand its reach. It wasn't just providing aid, it was restoring dignity, hope, and purpose. Eleanor, who had once been invisible to the world, was now its shining light. And yet, she never allowed the growing accolades to distance her from the cause. Eleanor became a frequent visitor at the shelters and community centers. She personally met with families, veterans, and others who came seeking help, listening to their stories and advocating for their needs. "This foundation isn't about me," she often reminded her team. "It's about them. Let's never lose sight of that." One of the foundation's hallmark programs was the Second Step Initiative, a scholarship fund for people looking to rebuild their lives through education and training. Eleanor was personally involved in interviewing candidates and awarding grants. One day, she sat across from a middle-aged man named Gerald, whose story struck her deeply. "I lost my way after my wife passed," he confessed, his voice trembling. "I didn't know how to move forward, and I ended up losing everything. But I've always dreamed of becoming a carpenter. I just want to build something again." Eleanor reached across the table and clasped his hands. "We'll help you build your dream," she said with a warm smile. Gerald's story, like so many others, reaffirmed the importance of the work they were doing. Each success story became a new thread in the fabric of the foundation, weaving together a tapestry of resilience and hope. Meanwhile, Alexander found himself stepping into an unexpected role as a mentor. Many young entrepreneurs and philanthropists sought his advice. Inspired by his shift from business magnate to social advocate, he welcomed these conversations, eager to share the lessons he had learned not just about business, but about life. One such mentee was Olivia, a young woman hoping to start a similar foundation in her own city. Over coffee in his office, she asked, "What made you take the leap from running a corporation to helping others?" Alexander leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. "Because I realized that no amount of success can replace the feeling of making a real difference," he said. "And because someone reminded me that it's never too late to change." The bond between Eleanor and Alexander deepened in ways neither of them had anticipated. While their partnership had started as an unlikely collaboration, it had grown into something far more profound, a mutual understanding born from shared pain and a common purpose. One evening, after a particularly long day, Eleanor and Alexander found themselves sitting on the steps of a newly opened shelter, watching the sunset. The sky was painted in hues of gold and orange, a quiet symbol of the hope they had worked so hard to create. "It's funny," Eleanor said, breaking the silence. "For so long I thought the world had forgotten me, but now I feel like I've finally found my place." Alexander glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "You didn't just find your place, you created it," he said. "And in doing so, you've given so many others a chance to find theirs." Their conversation was interrupted by the laughter of children playing in the courtyard, a sound that had become familiar at the foundation's shelters. Among them was Gerald, who had recently completed his carpentry training and was now volunteering to build play structures for the shelters. He waved at Eleanor and Alexander, his face alight with gratitude. Moments like this reminded them both of how far they had come, not just as individuals, but together. Alexander, once so guarded and consumed by his work, now found joy in the simplest of things: a child's laughter, a heartfelt thank you, the knowledge that he was making a difference. Eleanor, too, had transformed in ways she hadn't thought possible. She had gone from surviving to thriving, from being a victim of circumstance to a beacon of hope. And while the road had been anything but easy, she wouldn't trade it for anything. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Eleanor turned to Alexander with a small smile. "Do you think we've done enough?" she asked softly. Alexander shook his head. "Not yet," he replied. "But we're just getting started." The determination in his voice mirrored the fire in Eleanor's heart. Together, they had turned their pain into purpose, their struggles into strength. And as the stars began to light up the night sky, they knew their journey was far from over. Months passed, and the Eleanor Foundation became a household name. News outlets and community leaders praised its innovative programs and the transformative impact it had on countless lives. But for Eleanor and Alexander, the accolades were secondary. Their true reward lay in the stories of hope that emerged from every corner touched by their efforts. Eleanor had moved into a modest, comfortable apartment close to one of the Foundation's largest shelters. She wanted to remain connected to the heart of the cause, ensuring she was never far from the people she served. Her mornings were often spent at the shelter, sharing coffee and conversations with the residents. One morning, she was approached by a young woman named Claire, who had just found a job through the Foundation's employment program. Her face glowed with pride and gratitude. "I wanted to thank you, Miss Eleanor," Claire said. "You believed in me when no one else would. I don't know where I'd be without you." Eleanor smiled warmly, her eyes glistening. "You did this, Claire," she said. "We just gave you the tools. You built the future yourself." Meanwhile, Alexander continued to integrate the values of compassion and philanthropy into his corporate ventures. At a press conference, he announced that a percentage of his company's annual profits would be directed towards social initiatives. "I used to think success was about what I could achieve," he said, addressing the audience. "Now I know it's about what I can give back. Eleanor showed me that." His words resonated far beyond the conference room, inspiring other business leaders to follow suit. Alexander had become a champion of change, using his influence to advocate for causes close to his heart. Despite their growing responsibilities, Eleanor and Alexander made time to reflect on their journey. They often revisited the park bench where they first met, a place that had become symbolic of their transformation. One evening, as they sat under the soft glow of a nearby lamppost, Eleanor looked at Alexander with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been if we hadn't crossed paths?" Alexander smiled. "I don't think about that. I think about how lucky I am that we did." The Foundation's annual gala was a culmination of all they had worked for a night to celebrate the lives changed and the journeys begun. The event was held in a grand hall, its walls adorned with photographs of smiling faces and success stories from the Foundation's programs. Eleanor stood at the entrance, greeting guests as they arrived. She wore a simple yet elegant dress, her presence radiating warmth and humility. Among the attendees were former shelter residents, scholarship recipients, and volunteers, all of whom had played a part in the Foundation's success. Alexander took the stage to deliver the opening speech. The room fell silent as he spoke, his voice filled with conviction. "We're here tonight because one act of kindness can change everything," he began. "Eleanor taught me that. She reminded me that no matter how lost we feel, no matter how broken we think we are, we all have the power to make a difference." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "This foundation isn't just about giving people a second chance, it's about showing them they're not alone. It's about hope, resilience, and the strength we find in each other." The audience erupted into applause, their admiration for Alexander and Eleanor palpable. Toward the end of the night, a video montage was played, showcasing the Foundation's impact. Stories of individuals who had overcome immense adversity filled the screen, their gratitude shining through every word. Eleanor watched from her seat, her heart swelling with pride and emotion. As the final clip ended, the room rose to its feet in a standing ovation. Tears streamed down her face as she joined Alexander on stage to thank everyone who had supported their mission. The evening concluded with a toast, led by Alexander. Raising his glass, he said, "To hope, to healing, and to the belief that together we can build a better tomorrow." As the night wound down, Eleanor and Alexander stood by the entrance, bidding farewell to the guests. Gerald approached them, his young daughter in tow. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice thick with emotion. You've changed our lives, Eleanor smiled, bending down to greet the little girl. And you've changed ours, she replied softly.